Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. As the 2024 elections approach, you'll hear a lot about the presidential and gubernatorial races. But another contest is gaining outsized attention. It's the race for Attorney General. North Carolina's Attorney General is in charge of things like going after scammers or defending the state in lawsuits. But the job is becoming more political, here and across the nation. And the two likely frontrunners in North Carolina are among the state's most politically outspoken members of Congress. WRAL state government reporter Will Doran dug into how the AG role is changing and how that could factor into the 2024 election. And he joins us now. Will, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Will, for a long time, the Attorney General's office wasn't known for fireworks, but you report that's changing.
Yeah, like you said, it was usually just, if there's a criminal appeal going on, they would handle that. They would send out, the news releases, hey, watch out for this driveway repair guy. He scammed some people. They go after price gouging in the wake of hurricanes. It's important work, but it's not really high-profile, big political stuff. But that's changing. All across the country we've seen, and even here in North Carolina, seen the AG, suing presidents over policies they disagree with, jumping into big fights over things like abortion, immigration, environmental policies, and it's really kind of amped up really in the last decade or two.
Well, what has that transition looked like here in North Carolina under the past two attorneys general?
Yes, so obviously the current attorney general is Josh Stein, who is currently running for governor. Before him was Roy Cooper, who became governor. So you can see how this is kind of a stepping stone. And the two of them have been attorney general under a Republican-controlled legislature, and that's really kind of the first time in North Carolina history that's happened. It's always been, Democrats controlled the legislature for, 100 years. And so it's really been much more tense.
And Cooper and Stein are Democrats.
Correct, yes. They are Democrats, legislature's Republican, and we've really seen the tension amp up. There's been multiple cases where the legislature has gone and hired, outside private attorneys because they say they don't trust Cooper or Stein to adequately defend them, especially on big elections laws cases. They say, we think that they might kind of purposefully throw this case to help their side win. And there's even been some cases where Cooper and Stein have refused to defend laws in court. Cooper famously refused to defend HB 2. I think that might have been the first time that an AG here in North Carolina had ever done that before. Both he and Stein also refused to defend some election laws that were later struck down as unconstitutional for being racially discriminatory. But that was another controversial decision they made to kind of step out of that case and not do their job of defending the state in court.
And HB 2 is the bathroom bill, right?
That is correct. People remember back in 2016, we had kind of an anti-transgender bathroom bill that attracted a lot of national attention. They said Cooper refused to defend that in court, and it actually happened as he was running for governor, and he really used his refusal to help out the legislature on that case as a main part of his campaign for governor, and it worked. He squeaked by and won election.
And now Stein is running for governor, and you mentioned he's going to be trying to do exactly what Roy Cooper did. Is that a common pathway to the executive mansion?
It is. I interviewed 3 people for this article from all across the country, here in North Carolina, Virginia, D.C., and they all made the same joke that AG really stands for aspiring governor, not attorney general. And I went back into the archives and found actually every single man, and they've all been men, that's been elected attorney general here in North Carolina since 1968 has later run for either governor or U.S. Senate. So yes, it is seen as this sort of stepping stone, launching pad, whatever you want to call it, to higher office for ambitious politicians. And, that could really be, something that 2024 is going to set up. Whoever wins this race may serve a few terms like Cooper did, like Stein did before running for governor, before potentially running for U.S. Senate. And we've got, some pretty ambitious politicians who are emerging as the frontrunners here.
Well, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll hear more about those candidates and why some of them are leaving high-profile positions for a chance at the AG seat. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL State Government reporter Will Doran about the evolving role of the state attorney general. Will, before the break, you alluded to the frontrunners in the 2024 race for North Carolina Attorney General. Who are they, and what do we expect to hear from them in the months ahead?
So, yeah, to be clear, we still have to go through the primaries. We're not, coronating anybody right now, but I think it's pretty widely accepted that right now, Jeff Jackson on the Democratic side, Dan Bishop on the Republican side are the frontrunners for this race. They are both in Congress. I think for both of them, their supporters would say that they are really passionate advocates for what they believe in. Their detractors would probably say that they're blowhards. But they're both known. They really have a national following, and they're both known for really being kind of front and center out there on congressional stuff. There's hundreds of people in Congress, but they have managed to kind of stick out from the herd, and now they are both choosing to leave Congress to run for Attorney General.
Now, this is expected to be a pretty expensive race, and not just because of the names involved, right?
Yes, and AG's races in general have really ramped up in North Carolina in the past few years. I was looking back in 2012, Republicans didn't even run anybody against Cooper. they just let him win. In 2016, there was a few $1 million spent on it. But looking ahead, Dan Bishop and Jeff Jackson, even in 2022, raised millions of dollars, even for just, running for not a statewide race, just a district in Congress. And neither of them had competitive races. They were both in really safe districts. They never had a chance of losing, yet they were still able to raise millions of dollars. Now it's going to be a really, really competitive statewide race. And, in both 2016 and in 2020, Josh Stein won by less than 1% of the vote. These are incredibly, incredibly close races that we've seen in the recent future and that we're expecting to see again this year. So, it's going to be millions of dollars pouring in from business groups, from political groups, from, all sorts of sources.
And that money pouring into the race, that isn't just because of the more political cases that are in front of them, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, it's true that this role is becoming more politicized, but still a huge part of the Office of Attorney General is doing consumer protection work, kind of class action lawsuits. We've seen Josh Stein go after Meta, go after the e-cig company Juul, go after tons of opioid companies. And so, these big businesses want to have their preferred candidates in office. They're going to be spending a lot of money trying to influence the race. And, if I were a CEO of a Fortune 500 company and I was scared that, a potential candidate for AG might start investigating me, I'd certainly want, their opponent to maybe be in office instead. And so, it's really kind of ballooned as AGs have taken on a more proactive role in some of these things. You're getting money not just from the political side, but from the business side as well.
Now, the 2020 elections obviously showed how the AG role can carry significant political power. How will that factor into the next presidential election?
Yeah, so as people will remember, President Donald Trump, tried to stay in power in 2020 and worked hard to overturn the election. And part of that was through a lawsuit from Republican state attorneys general backing him up, trying to get some of these swing states' votes thrown out. And that was led by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, and actually Dan Bishop signed an amicus brief supporting that. Josh Stein signed an amicus brief opposing it at the time. But here's an example of how who you have as Attorney General and the actions they take as Attorney General can directly translate, potentially, or at least has the potential to translate into who is going to be the president. And so, here we have 2024 looming, another potential rematch between Biden and Trump. And, if that gets litigated, well into 2025 potentially, then, who North Carolina elects as their Attorney General could be making some big legal decisions on which stance to take in any potential lawsuits that we see about the 2024 presidential election.
Now, as we've discussed, the AG role is kind of this launching pad for governor. One might think that lieutenant governor would also have a strong chance. After all, it is the second highest ranking executive office in the state. Are they different?
They're very different. And you've kind of seen that, in the success of politicians reaching the governor's office. Bev Perdue had been a lieutenant governor, but there have been far more attorneys general who became governors, Cooper, Mike Easley, others have run for the office but haven't won it. And Part of the difference is just the way the offices are set up. As we've been talking about, the AG's office has kind of immense power. You can really make it whatever you want here, and you can, focus on which companies to target, which political actions to take. Josh Stein has brought in $1 billion from settlements with opioid companies that he can now point to on, the campaign trail for governor and say, hey, I did this. Lieutenant governor's office here in North Carolina is really powerless. It has almost no official duties. It's kind of a figurehead position, which does offer some power in and of itself. You can really have the power of the bully pulpit and, spend your entire time in office traveling the state, talking to crowds. And, we've seen Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson do that right now. And he is actually kind of emerging as the Republican frontrunner for governor. Josh Stein is the Democratic frontrunner for governor. So it could actually be a really good microcosm in this 2024 election of, okay, which do voters prefer, at least in terms of experience? Do they mind that the lieutenant governor doesn't really have any powers in North Carolina and hasn't had a ton of experience, wielding influence and making big decisions, or is that not necessarily a deal breaker for voters?
Now, you spoke with a number of political scientists who have been both watching the evolution of the AG role and the 2024 governor's race. What do they see in the coming AG race?
Well, it could be a factor, as I said, because of the Republican-led legislature in recent years. There's been a lot of tension with the Democratic attorneys general, Roy Cooper and Josh Stein. If a Republican were to win the AG's race, then those tensions could kind of simmer down. Not to necessarily say that they would agree 100% of the time, but, if it's Dan Bishop, he's a former state senator. He's not likely to go against his former colleagues in the state legislature the same way that Stein and Cooper have done. On the other hand, if a Republican does win and, say, Joe Biden wins re-election, then we could see North Carolina really amp up efforts to sue the federal government to stop priorities of the Biden administration. On the other hand, if a Republican should win the presidency, but North Carolina elects a Democratic attorney general, same way, that person can continue to be a thorn in the side of that, Republican presidential administration. So lots of moving pieces here. But one thing everyone agrees on is that, whoever does win is probably, expected at some point to look at higher office, whether that's, becoming governor, running for U.S. Senate. Whoever wins is, absolutely a figure to keep an eye on.
Well, we know that you'll be watching and reporting in the weeks and months and hopefully years ahead. Will, thanks.
Thank you.
That's WRAL State Government reporter Will Doran. For his in-depth look at the North Carolina Attorney General's race, visit the NC Capital section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.